I mean, it would happen. It's just one in a million. It could happen.
I want to ask a game dev question, like Alex said.
Yeah.
You've had a really cool career as both an animation artist, and now as a video game developer and designer. We talked earlier about what the difference is between finishing and releasing these two different kinds of projects. But I want to know what is the... I was calling this, when I was typing this in chat earlier, I was calling this like the daily bullshit. Like, what is kind of like... How do you feel about the difference between the daily small tasks you have to do to make your idea? What do you feel is the biggest difference in these two mediums, and the things that aren't exciting, don't necessarily make you say, this is my beautiful grand idea, but you're just sitting there going, crap, like, this is what I have to do to make this darn thing even function? Like what? How do you talk about the difference between those two things?
Do you mean the difference between animation and games, or between the small day-to-day tasks and something else?
The small day-to-day tasks of animation versus the small day-to-day tasks of games.
Okay, they're very different.
Yeah.
That's a whole topic that could take a long time, but I'll just say this. Like, games develop in a way that I can only describe as organic. Like, in that they tend to start as a kind of a core and then grow outward. In a way where with animation, it's much more like a timeline, where it's like a thing that sort of has more like a branching thing, where it starts, it has this one sort of direction, and then that direction sort of fills out. But in games, it's like this pronged shape. And here's why. Here's a more practical example. In animation, you're basically you're setting up a timeline of, and typically you'll have a storyboard or an animated storyboard that you're filling in with scenes. And then once those things are rendered, they're essentially locked into place, and they're very hard to change. And so once you're doing that, and you're trying to make that cohesive, it's very tricky, and you kind of have to stick to things. And in games, you can make fundamental changes to one part of it, and they affect the entire organism of the thing. And so it's so interconnected, and the changes can be so dramatic, even towards the very end of production, that it's a much more enjoyable thing. Now, there's other things that are not so easy. So in animation, in 3D animation, you can get away with quite a lot of things. You can show because you're dealing with shots, with layouts. So this is a static shot where most of the things aren't going to move. You can get away with a lot, and you can paint stuff up, and you can just sort of fudge things. In games, every side of every object, underneath of it, every angle needs to be perfect. Close up, far away, it needs to read. And so there's a lot more work in modeling that and also these things are lit. If people know my animation work, I don't use a lot of lights, usually flat shading. So these things are lit, so they have the added problems of just being better colored, have normals, have UV maps. It's a lot more stuff. Again, this is sort of like, I could talk about this for a long time, but it is a very different process. But speaking only as somebody who does, like, I'm mostly very involved in the technical aspect of what I'm doing. Even if I have a team working with me, I still do lots of stuff that I do, like animation and modeling and shaders and compositing and all that stuff. And day to day, I enjoy the game iteration process more because you really feel like you're building this 3D universe. And in animation, even though it's 3D, ultimately you're building stuff that's going to be just 2D images. That's your ultimate end form of that is JPEGs or whatever, and they're flat. And but I really enjoy the iteration process of games more. It does take a lot longer.
So that sort of begs the question: why